Hey there friends, David Lightbringer here off camera to introduce a little Winds of Winter predictions video. Thanks very much for clicking. While researching for the Hardhome video that I put out last week, thanks very much for watching, I stumbled into a new Arya Winds prediction relating to the how, why, and where of her eventual return to Westeros. I was originally going to talk about that at the end of the Hardhome video, but I decided to break it off into its own thing, so that's what we're here to do today, and it's going to go a little something like this. So first, the setup of the current situation at Hardhome, which will lead into the Arya / Braavos / Hardhome / Jon Snow Winds of Winter predictions. There's a couple. And then I've got a weird little theory about where those Lysene slavers who stole wildlings from Hardhome, there were 2 ships, one of them ended up in Braavos, and I've got a theory about where they really came from, which makes it all even more twisted. Then I'll discuss the possible explanations for the dead things in the water, which you guys are waiting for, I know. And then more Winds of Winter predictions involving the possibility of a White Walker white attack at Hardhome, which is, an obvious possibility that we could be facing very soon. Mel has foreseen it, in fact. And then, bonus, at the end, a couple of awesome comments from you guys on the Hardhome video that give us some new clues about what may have happened. One of these new clues comes from the Conan universe, and I must say it freaking rules, and it might imply something about fireworms at Hardhome, so make sure to watch to the end for that. All right, it's time for the aforepromised Winds of Winter predictions, and I don't know if aforepromised is a word, but I did promise them afore. So, predicting the future of Hardhome starts with the present of Hardhome, and as Cotter Pike said, things are very bad here. Forget about legends of ghouls, people are eating the dead because they have nothing else to eat. And this is all thanks again to Mother Mole, the Woods Witch, who had a vision of a fleet of ships arriving to carry the free folk to safety across the narrow sea. So there are hundreds and even a few thousand wildling refugees there, starving, waiting for the prophecy to fulfill itself, and eating the dead, like we said. They have no shelter but the caves, and apparently some sort of wooden palisade or defense that Melisandre glimpsed in her vision, although we don't know if that vision has come to pass yet. What we do know is that all these people are at risk of starving and freezing, and that's if the others don't attack. So Jon, of course, does send a fleet of ships, 11 ships, as Mother Mole foresaw, and these ships are intended to rescue the wildlings. Unfortunately, 2 Lysene slave ships seem to have made it there first, and this is actually something that Arya learns about in Braavos and reports back to the kindly man, so I'll let Arya give it to you. I know why the Sea Lord seized the Good Heart. She was carrying slaves, hundreds of slaves, women and children roped together in the hold. Braavos had been founded by escaped slaves, and the slave trade was forbidden here. I know where the slaves came from. They were wildlings from Westeros, from a place called Hardhome, an old ruined place, accursed. Old Nan had told her tales of Hardhome back at Winterfell, when she had still been Arya Stark. After the big battle where the king beyond the wall was killed, the wildlings ran away, and this Woods Witch said if they went to Hardhome, ships would come and carry them away to someplace warm. But no ships came except these 2 Lysene pirates, Goodheart and Elephant, that had been driven north by a storm. They dropped anchor off Hardhome to make repairs and saw the wildlings. But there were thousands, and they didn't have room for all of them, so they said they'd just take the women and the children. The wildlings had nothing to eat, so the men sent out their wives and daughters. But as soon as the ships were out to sea, the Lysene drove them below and roped them up. They meant to sell them all in Lys. Only then they ran into another storm, and the ships were parted. The Goodheart was so damaged her captain had no choice but to put in here. But the Elephant may have made it back to Lys. The Lysene at Pintos think that she'll return with more ships. The price of slaves is rising, they said, and there are thousands more women and children at Hardhome. All right, so a lot of information there, but first off the bat, now a bunch of wildling women and children are in Braavos. Let chaos reign. They're certainly doing better there than they were at Hardhome. But unfortunately, as you heard, the other ship full of wildling captives is on its way to Lys, and so those people are enslaved. So first question, what happens if, as Arya says, the Lysene slavers send more ships back to Hardhome? What if they get there while the watch is still there? From worse to worser. So it seems like Cotter Pike's fleet of 11 ships that Jon sent is the one that Mother Mole dreamed of. So in that sense, she was right. But of course, the vision led the wildlings to trust the Lysene slavers, and in that sense, she was wrong. Unfortunately, because of these Lysene pirates, the wildlings are now skeptical of Cotter Pike's rescue fleet. And as we saw, They are calling them slavers. That's probably because the Braavosi galleys will only take women and children, and although we know the Braavosi are not slavers, they're anti-slavery, they're the ones that rescued the wildlings from the other Lysene slavers, they are probably afraid of the wildling men simply because the wildling men are fearsome warriors, and the wildlings tried to take one of the other Night's Watch ships by force, and 6 of the Night's Watchmen were killed, as we read. There are only 6 of those 11 ships left, and Cotter Pike's command ship, Talon, is taking on water and may not be seaworthy, and you'll notice Cotter Pike is saying, "Send help by land, the storms are really bad." So, yeah, it's sailing out of Hardhome doesn't seem to be an option. And don't forget, Cotter Pike is an Ironborn, so if he says it's stormy out, it's probably stormy out. And that means it is quickly turning into a situation where the Night's Watchmen are as stranded as the wildlings. Only there is an extreme amount of tension and hostility between these two groups, which have historically been enemies. Now, just taking a minute for Jon's character development, this is a big moment for Jon. Not only is he sending a rescue mission to save these wildlings at Hardhome, he's the one who was initially planning to lead it. And this is a controversial decision. One of Jon's A Dance with Dragons chapters begins with Selyse saying, "Let them die," meaning the wildlings. Jon says, "Hey, but there's lots of women and children," and she's like, "Let them be reborn in the light. We don't have enough food for them, and they're not old enough to fight in my husband's army, so yeah. Let them be reborn in the light." First Steward Bowen Marsh agrees, and First Builder Othel Yarwick says, "Yeah, send wildlings to save wildlings, but don't send us." So that's the range of opinions. But of course, Jon, he's a hero, so he's going to go there himself and save these people. He's actually really trying to integrate the wildlings into the population of Westeros and sees them as his people, or at least his responsibility. And he sees them as people, flat out, which obviously is not true for a lot of Westerosi. We see extensive dehumanization of the wildlings. So Jon, as I said, initially going to lead the ranging, but plans shifted after they got the pink letter from Ramsay Snow, or whoever wrote it. After that, they changed plans, and it's going to be Tormund who leads the ranging. But then about 5 minutes later, Jon gets murdered, and A Dance with Dragons ends, and so that mission never left. So the question is, why did George add this wrinkle of the Lysene slavers showing up to abduct some wildlings, half of which end up in Braavos for Arya to hear about? Of course, we know these southern slavers are exploring further afield because Dany has smashed the slave trade in Slavers Bay. But these slavers better be careful because these are Braavosi territorial waters that they are passing through, and the Braavosi are fiercely anti-slavery. And they also have a powerful navy under the command of the Sea Lord. So the question then becomes, now that the Braavosi and the Sea Lord know about Lysene pirates operating up north and taking slaves from Westeros, and then sailing right by Braavos, essentially, will they take offense? Will the Sea Lord send his navy out, either to block the straits or perhaps even to rescue some of these wildlings at Hardhome? The Sea Lords do take a hand in politics from time to time and send their fleet out to put people in their place. And one big clue that the powers that be in Braavos might be inclined to do this, to send rescue ships to Hardhome, not only to foil slavery, but because Tycho Nestoris of the Iron Bank has worked out a deal with Jon Snow and the Night's Watch. That means the Night's Watch is now an investment that the Iron Bank would want to protect, and there's a bunch of Night's Watchmen stranded at Hardhome now. So last we heard of Tycho Nestoris, the Braavosi banker. You'll remember he's got the funny hat. He left the wall after making a deal with Jon to go find Stannis and make a deal with him, which he successfully did, and then Stannis charged him with returning fake Arya, aka Jane Poole, to the wall. By this time, Jane Poole and Theon had jumped off the wall of Winterfell and shown up in Stannis' camp with Frostbite. So Melisandre's vision of Arya arriving at Castle Black, a gray girl on a dying horse, that turned out to be Jane Poole showing up under the guide of Tycho Nestoris and a few others. So, and perhaps you can see where this is going, when Tycho goes to Braavos and then presumably returns to Westeros, might he now escort the real Arya Stark back to Westeros and back to the wall? He already brought the fake Arya to the wall, so now maybe he'll bring the real Arya. Because think about it, if Tycho Nestoris turns up back in Braavos and mentions to a couple of people that, yeah, he rescued Arya Stark and brought her back to the wall and reunited her with her brother, Jon Snow, the real Arya may end up hearing about that because she's out there listening and trying to pick up information. And how's Arya going to feel? How would you feel if you heard about you on a different continent running around doing stuff with your family, but it wasn't you because you weren't there? That would be something you might want to attend to. Extra ironic because Arya is a faceless man. That's her thing, to impersonate people. So she's like, what? Say what? Somebody's running around with my name? This could be the thing that motivates Arya to go back to Westeros. And that's pretty interesting because most of the predictions for Arya involve her going back to Westeros in the Riverlands so she can interact with the Wolfpack and Lady Stoneheart. And obviously she is going to meet up with the Wolfpack at some point. But it would also make sense if she goes back to Westeros in the north and meets up with Jon Snow's plotline. Jon's going to need some allies whenever he gets resurrected. And Bran's going to turn up at the wall too. So we can have a little family reunion, little Stark reunion. And of course, Rickon is also in the north. He's currently on Skagos and maybe heading back to Winterfell under the care of Davos Seaworth. So I'll let you speculate further in the comments, of course. But yeah, what do you think? Arya Stark hitching a ride with a Braavosi ship back to Hardhome and then the Wall. This could be the entire reason for these Lysene pirates being in the plot and having one of them show up in Braavos. It motivates the Braavosi to take a hand in things, and it creates a way for Arya to get back to the north. And by the way, I don't think anyone else is coming to rescue those wildlings. I mean, Jon Snow's not gonna, he's dead. So if it's not the Braavosi, they're probably screwed. Okay, so here's a little bonus theory for you. You guys tell me if I'm hallucinating here. But I think that Martin might be implying that these two Lysene ships who took wildling women and children from Hardhome, took them captive to be slaves, those could be two of the ships that were with Cotter Pike, two of the 11 ships that Jon Snow sent. Because 4 of those 11 ships were Lysene ships, and 3 of those 4 were former pirates from Salador Sand's pirate army that Stannis rented. So after the Battle of the Blackwater, some of those pirates ended up in northern waters, and 3 of them turned up at Eastwatch, badly in need of repair. The Night's Watch fixed them up somewhat, and now those 3, and apparently 1 other Lysene galley, are included in the 11. Then in the next letter Jon gets, they're down to 6 ships. So we've lost 5 somehow, but we're only given an explanation for 3 of them. 1 is Blackbird, lost with all hands. That's presumably a Night's Watch ship with the name Blackbird. And 2 of those Lysene ships were driven aground on Skane, which is an island next to Skagos. So what happened to those other 2 ships? And where are the other 2 Lysene ships? 2 of them ran aground. What happened to the other 2? Because there were 4. So here's what I'm thinking. As Cotter Pike's 11 ships are getting strung out on their way to Hardhome, 2 of the 4 Lysene ships end up in the lead ahead of everyone. They get to Hardhome first. They take women and children on board, and then they look at each other, the 2 pirate captains, and they're like, let's just beat it out of here and sell these MFers as slaves. Or perhaps they even formed a plan to run ahead of the rest and pull this off, while they were on the way. These are pirates, so who knows? This all could have happened before Cotter Pike even arrived at Hardhome, so he might not know about it at all. And that might be why he didn't mention what happened to those other 2 ships, because he doesn't know. They just haven't turned up yet. Or it could even be that Cotter Pike knows what happened and is just leaving it out and not wanting to tell Jon. So that all makes sense so far, but the main problem with this theory is that the Arya chapter, where she's hearing about the slavers, the 2 Lysene ships who've taken slaves, and 1 showed up in Braavos, that chapter happens slightly before the Jon chapter where he sends out the 11 ships. Now, I'm not saying the ships time traveled, but of course George has said that his chapters from different characters aren't necessarily all chronological. And they're not that far away from each other in Dance. So it could very well be that the timeline is reversed a little bit, perhaps to disguise the mystery. It could be that Jon sent those 11 ships out. 2 of the 4 Lysene took slaves and bailed out of there before the other ships got to Hardhome. And then 1 showed up in Braavos, which again is not far. And this could have all happened within about a week of each other. Because there's a lot of Lysene ships sailing around in the north. We're told that these 2 that took the slaves from Hardhome anchored off the shore of Hardhome to make repairs, but what the hell were they doing that far north? Nobody knew that the wildlings were massing at Hardhome, so they didn't go to Hardhome intentionally to take slaves, at least not sailing from Lys. So the cover story is fishy, and it could be that we'll find out, that Arya will find out, that these were actually supposed to be Night's Watch rescue ships that turned back slaver, because they were pirates before all this. And sorry, I don't mean to insult. I know they're not the same as slavers, but there's a thin line sometimes. So again, I will say, let me know what you think in the comments about this idea. All right, let's close this one out with dead things in the wood, dead things in the water. And as we can see, Cotter Pike has found religion now. because he believes in the Snarks and Grumpkins now that he's seeing them up close. Only they're dead Snarks and Grumpkins. And, of course, dead things in the wood would be the Whites, the army of the dead. We know they're lurking in the woods, picking off the wildlings on their flanks. But what about those dead things in the water? It's been a perplexing line in the fandom for a long time, because it's been a long time since we've got a new book, as you may know. So are these whited sea mammals, seals and sea lions and things? I mean, so far we've really only seen whited mammals. So if bears, why not seals? They could be literally dead things in the water. This would just make the whole scene more horrific. That's really the only reason for that. And I suppose it would be a kind of shout out to Lovecraft with dead things in the water. I don't know. It's a cool line, really. And that may be all it is. It's just a little extra atmosphere and ambiance. And the other option, of course, is that they are deep ones in the water. According to Nimble Dick, the deep ones are pale and fishy looking, and Biter might be a merling, and he looks kind of dead with the pasty skin. So it could just be that deep ones in the water are lurking for a meal, and they look kind of like dead things. There are legends in the Shivering Sea of mermaids, pale of flesh, with black-scaled tails, far more maligned than their sisters of the south. And that kind of sounds whitish, frankly. Pale skin, the black extremities, kind of like the whites have the black hands. So maybe these legends are actually of whited sea mammals, or maybe, again, the deep ones kind of look dead. Either one could work. Maybe we've got whited deep ones. That'd be really just out of pocket. However, it pains me to say this as a deep ones enthusiast, it's probably dead mammals. I think that's more likely. I just don't know how much room there is for deep ones actually coming out of the water and messing with the plot. I mostly think they are fun world building. However, Patchface does offer to lead the ranging to Hardhome. Patchface, who has clearly consulted with the deep ones. And Patchface's plan to get to Hardhome is to march into the sea and back out again. So maybe deep ones are gonna come out of the sea at Hardhome, and Martin's just gonna go ham in Winds of Winter. Maybe Patchface hears the deep ones calling and wants to lead the army out of the sea. Or maybe this is all just a clue that there is really deep ones activity going on. We'll just have to wait and find out. Hey guys, post-production Dave here to say that I forgot to bring up the crab gods at Storworld's Point again. If they're worshiping crab gods here, that means they're worshiping some sort of gods in the sea, and it sounds a lot like the other coastal religions that we find around Westeros, which seem to refer to the deep ones. So there were indeed ancient wildlings here worshiping something under the sea. And of course, Crab is the last name of Nimble Dick Crab, who is the one who tells us about the squishers. So crab gods, they could be squisher gods. And that in turn increases the likelihood that the dead things in the water are actually deep ones. Watch out. And finally, we have the topic of the others potentially attacking Hardhome in the future. So far, they've mostly, again, picked at the flanks of the wildlings whenever they've clustered together or moved as a herd. So it's always kind of seemed like the others are herding the wildlings towards the wall potentially, or at least not trying to wipe them all out. Or it could be that the others are just gradually becoming more active, and so they're only picking away at the wildlings' flanks. But they certainly might show up at Hardhome, and Melisandre's vision seems to clearly foreshadow that, so I'd say it's a good bet. And when we think about the people trying to defend themselves at Hardhome, the odds aren't looking good. There may be some dragonglass there. Again, if there's volcanic activity, there could be dragonglass. Maybe some of the wildlings know how to flint knap a few arrowheads, but really I don't think they know how to fight the others there if they come in force. Or I guess I should say they don't really have the resources to fight the others. They don't have any Valyrian steel, they don't have any dragons, and they're starving. You could speculate about a Children of the Forest / Cold Hands rescue, but I don't know, that seems far-fetched too. We've never seen the children move in force against the others. They didn't come to rescue the Night's Watch at the Fist of the First Men, after all. And even though the children do obviously move through the caves, and you might think they could pop out of the caves at Hardhome, the screaming sound indicates there's gas back there, so that seems a little dicey too. Maybe some of the passages are free, but if there's gas leaks in there, you don't want to be going in there at all. And certainly not with torches, which means you're in the dark. So yeah. I do want to raise the possibility that where this is going is a huge massacre, just as Mel has seen. All the fires go out and there's nothing left but skulls. Maybe thousands of people, wildlings and Night's Watchmen, are all gonna die, and maybe this will serve to begin to spread terror through Westeros of the others, serve to announce their imminent invasion. Perhaps the slaughter will be witnessed by a couple of ships offshore so they can carry word to everyone else about how terrifying they are. That would be kind of messed up, but I mean, tell me that George wouldn't do that. You can't. He would do that. And again, if it's not going to be a slaughter, then we pretty much need the Braavosi to show up, because I don't see anyone else capable of rescuing them. And then the final plot thread idea that's kind of lurking around here is the idea of some of the wildling slaves that were taken by the one ship that didn't end up in Braavos, the one that was on its way to Lys. Once the slaves arrive there, they will be sold and distributed, and some of them could end up in nearby Volantis, just in time for Dany to show up to liberate the slaves of Volantis. And think about how much potential that has. Dany could begin hearing about the threat of the others in the north. They'd be kind of sketchy rumors from a few of the slaves, some of the Khaleesi, some of the slaves are saying. But it does have to start somewhere. She has to start, hearing about the others and the threat that she's going to eventually take her dragons to confront. This would give her knowledge of the north as well, because she'd be meeting these wildlings, and it would begin to build a connection to Jon Snow, because if she turns up in Westeros already protecting wildling refugees, well, Jon's going to think that's pretty swell. And some of those wildlings may even have something good to say about Jon. The last idea here is that maybe Hardhome will be a dragon refuge in the future. When Jon and Dany take their eventual journey north to the heart of winter, maybe they'll be beset at a certain point, and the geothermic caves of Hardhome will be a refuge. Or maybe when this is all done, Drogon, the lone surviving dragon, will make his home there. All right, it's time for the Hardhome video smart comments from you guys. So the first one is from Magister343, asking, did the Valyrians perhaps think that Hardhome was Braavos? So as I mentioned in the video, Hardhome's explosion was 200 years before the Doom, and thus it may have occurred during that time after Braavos was founded by escaped slaves from Valyria, but before Braavos announced its presence to the world. Ergo, Valyria may have been out hunting for those escaped slaves with dragons. The foggy lagoon that hid Braavos for more than a century is on the way to Hardhome from Valyria, so perhaps the Dragon Lords had the general direction right to the north and just wound up too far north and at Hardhome, where they found a village of scrappy-looking folks and just let loose the dragon flame before they asked too many questions, setting off the flammable gas in the cliffs and sparking the huge conflagration. This is a really good idea because it provides a potential motivation for the Valyrians to not only come to Hardhome, but to wipe it out, so good job. And then Clover Azar 5315 points out that the Faceless Men probably picked up their skin magic from the Boltons, which is something I've discussed in the Bolton Secret and the House of Black and White videos, and that this suggests a connection between northern Westeros and the early Faceless Men. Now, I suggested in the Hardhome video that perhaps a post-Hardhome wildling may have ended up in the Valyrian slave mines, because there are stories about the Hardhome people being carried off into slavery, and that this wildling in the Valyrian slave mines was perhaps one of the first Faceless Men, or simply gave the Faceless Men part of their idea for the Doom. So if the first Faceless Men did learn their flaying magic from the Boltons, then there must have been some contact one way or the other between Westeros and the Faceless Men. Since flaying magic is theoretically a derivative of skin changing, that's what I think anyway, it does seem possible that some wildlings would also know of it, and so perhaps they brought the secret to the Faceless Men via being enslaved by the Valyrians. And then finally, this is the big one. This is from Galster, who brought to my attention that Robert E. Howard's The Valley of the Worm, which is a book set in the Conan universe, is probably where George got the name Gorm the Wolf, who's one of those chieftains from the Hardhome story about the Maester traveling to Hardhome. I'll be reading and summarizing these plot highlights from dmrbooks.com, so shout out to them. So there's a group of people named the Aesir in this story, who are obviously named after the Norse gods, and one group of these Aesir split off from the main tribe and decided to make their new abode in a place called the Valley of Broken Stones, which is so named for the shattered columns, relics of a forgotten civilization, which litter the valley floor. Shortly thereafter, the main character, Njord, discovers that a mysterious doom has befallen the valley, leaving the Aesir folks slaughtered. Then comes an outsider named Grom the Pict, and the Picts of northern Scotland have made it into the story, obviously. Grom the Pict, he tells Njord of his people's legends regarding this valley, and it turns out that long ago, a clan of Picts suffered a similar fate in the Vale. So this is already a lot like Hardhome. There's a past disaster, and then there's a second one that could foreshadow obviously a second disaster coming to Hardhome. But what was the disaster? Well, apparently, some horrible monstrosity came up from the earth to wreak havoc, accompanied by a hairy anthropomorphic being and the sound of demoniac piping. And that would be the inspiration for the Screaming Caves. And so Njord vows to put an end to whatever these entities might be. And basically, they are worms. Out of the temple, the monstrous dweller in darkness had come, and I, who had expected a horror yet cast in some terrestrial mold, looked on the spawn of nightmare. From what subterranean hell it crawled in the long ago, I know not, nor what black age it represented. But it was not a beast, as humanity knows beasts. I call it a worm, for lack of a better term. There is no earthly language which has a name for it. I can only say that it looked somewhat more like a worm than it did an octopus, or a serpent, or a dinosaur. So there you go. It's clearly something George had in mind. Gorm the Wolf, a chieftain at Hardhome, visited by an outsider, the Maester. And then in this story, The Valley of the Worm, Gorm the Pict is the outsider, explaining the dangers of the area to the locals. There's some sort of disaster, which is called a doom, and it turns out to be caused by, the equivalent of fireworms, some sort of demon worms demoniac worms that crawled up from the abyss, etc. You heard the language. So that certainly could imply that it is fireworms and not dragons roosting in the caves. That might still preserve Dragon Bomb theory. I don't know if the fireworms lay eggs or not. Or it could be that fireworms and dragons, have both been in the same place. Or it could be that George is imagining dragons either roosting there or coming there, and that's his version of the demoniac worm. But most literally, it would imply fireworms somehow being involved, coming out of the Screaming Caves. That's... Maybe the fireworms set off the gas, but man, just when you thought Hardhome couldn't get any more terrifying, perhaps the fireworms crawled out of the caves. So there you go. Thanks for watching the video, folks. And for those of you watching today on Sunday when this one came out, sorry there was no live stream today, but we will have a live stream on Tuesday this week at 3 p.m. Pacific. And that's going to be me and Sean, Hero with 1,000 Voices, absolutely hacking apart and giving the business to the Mountain and the Viper Trial by Combat. So don't miss that this Tuesday, 3 p.m. Or if you're watching in the future, find it in the feed if that sounds interesting. Thanks very much. Shout out Yellowstone Park. Shout out Whited Bears. Shout out Whited Sea Lions. Shout out Deep Ones. Shout out the Black-Scaled Mermaids. And shout out to you for watching the video, leaving a comment, making sure you're subscribed, all that stuff, and tuning in every Sunday, Starry Wisdom Sunday, 1 p.m. Pacific. You guys know the drill.